Have you ever noticed how some of the most ordinary items in our homes have the most extraordinary stories? Tonight, we are going to drift back more than a century and uncover the strange and fascinating story of Listerine, a product that began its life far away from the bathroom sink. The story begins in 1879 in St. Louis, Missouri. A young chemist named Dr. Joseph Lawrence was experimenting with antiseptic solutions. He wanted to honor the famous British surgeon Joseph Lister, who had become a pioneer in using sterilization during surgery. To honor him, Lawrence named his new creation Listerine. At first, Listerine was never meant for fresh breath or daily use. Instead, it was marketed to doctors and surgeons. In those early years, hospitals were dangerous places. Infections spread quickly, and a small cut could mean death. Listerine was powerful, and it became a tool for cleaning wounds, sterilizing surgical instruments, and protecting patients. Soon, bottles of Listerine sat on the shelves of pharmacies across America, but people weren't rinsing with it after brushing their teeth. They were using it in hospitals, doctors' offices, and sometimes even as a general household cleaner. By the late 1800s, advertisements for Listerine suggested it could help with just about anything: sore throats, dandruff, and even as a floor cleaner. The truth is, people weren't really sure what its true purpose was. It was strong, it was versatile, and it seemed to do something useful. But it hadn't yet found its real place in everyday life. Still, the product survived, quietly waiting for its breakthrough moment. A problem nobody knew they had. By the early 1900s, Listerine's sales were slowing down. People didn't see a reason to keep buying it. Yes, it was useful in hospitals, but the everyday person didn't feel like they needed it. That's when a powerful marketing idea came into play, an idea that would change not only Listerine, but the way businesses sold products forever. In the 1920s, the company behind Listerine decided to focus on something entirely different: bad breath. Back then, people didn't even use the term. Sure, everyone knew that sometimes breath could smell unpleasant, but it wasn't considered a major social problem. In fact, the medical-sounding word halitosis wasn't even in common language, so the Listerine company gave it to them. They began running advertisements with dramatic headlines and stories. One famous ad showed a young woman who, despite being beautiful and kind, never seemed to find love. The heartbreaking reason? She suffered from halitosis, an unseen affliction that drove potential suitors away. Another ad told the story of a young man who couldn't succeed in business because his bad breath silently pushed clients away. These ads tapped into something deeper than science. They tapped into fear and insecurity. Suddenly, people began to worry. What if they had halitosis and didn't know it? What if bad breath was silently ruining their relationships or careers? For the first time, Americans felt that fresh breath wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. And there, waiting on the pharmacy shelf, was the solution: Listerine, turning fear into fortune. The marketing campaign worked beyond anyone's imagination. Within just 7 years, Listerine's sales skyrocketed from $115,000 to over $8 million. That's not just growth, that's transformation. All of a sudden, Listerine wasn't just another antiseptic. It was a household name, a daily ritual, and a social safeguard. People bought it not because they thought it tasted good, it certainly didn't but because they believed it would protect their relationships, their reputations, and their futures. The genius of Listerine's success was that the product itself never really changed. What changed was the story around it. By introducing the idea of halitosis, the company defined a problem people hadn't even recognized, and then positioned their product as the solution. From there, Listerine continued to evolve. It became a trusted mouthwash, endorsed by dentists, and eventually grew into one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Today, when you walk down the aisle of any grocery store or pharmacy, there it is, Rows of brightly colored bottles promising freshness and protection. But behind that familiar label lies one of the cleverest business strategies of all time. Listerine didn't just fight germs. It invented a problem and then solved it. So tonight, as you let your eyes close and your thoughts settle, remember the curious journey of this little bottle of mouthwash. A story that began in the quiet halls of surgery, was saved by the power of imagination, and grew into an empire built not on invention alone, but on the ability to see, and sometimes even create, the needs of the world around us. And that is the strange, soothing story of how Listerine became mouthwash by inventing bad breath. Have you ever looked at an everyday object and wondered, how did that get there? How did we go from horse-drawn carriages to cars, or from rotary phones to smartphones? Well, here's a fun fact for you. Did you know that Listerine, the mouthwash you probably use every day, actually started its life as a floor cleaner? Yep, that's right. It wasn't until 1921 that it made its way into your medicine cabinet, and even then, it wasn't intended for freshening your breath. No siree. Its original use was disinfection. It was created as a surgical antiseptic, used in hospitals to clean wounds and sterilize equipment. Now let me take you back to 1879. This was before there were antibiotics, and a trip to the hospital was a bit of a gamble. If you were lucky, you'd come out the other side healed and whole. But if you weren't, well, an infection could easily set in. And believe me, back then, an infection was no joke. It could turn a small cut into a life-threatening situation. In those days, there was a bright, shining star in the medical field. A man by the name of Joseph Lister, a British surgeon. He'd figured out that if you sterilized equipment and kept things super clean, the chances of infection went way down. Now he was a bit ahead of his time, so to say, and it wasn't always smooth sailing. But his dedication to cleanliness revolutionized surgery. Fast forward now to St. Louis, where a chemist named Joseph Lawrence was doing his own experiments. He wanted to pay homage to Sir Joseph Lister, the pioneer of sterilization. And he had an idea. He'd make an antiseptic and call it Listerine. Now you might be thinking, hold up, what's the difference between antiseptic and disinfectant? Well, here's the simple. An antiseptic is meant to kill germs on living tissue like skin, while disinfectant is used on surfaces or objects. So in 1879, Lawrence created his antiseptic solution, the very first Listerine, which he labeled as such. He was ready to unveil it to the world. Now remember, this was long before fancy advertising agencies and market research firms. So when Lawrence brought his Listerine to market, he was pretty much shooting in the dark. He sent samples to doctors, hoping they'd see its potential for cleaning wounds, sterilizing instruments, and treating cuts and scrapes. And you know what? His gamble paid off. Doctors loved it. Soon enough, pharmacies across the US were stocking bottles of Listerine. Now this is important. You see, in those days, people didn't just buy Listerine for their bathrooms. Oh no, it was all about that versatility. It was a household product, a must-have for cuts, scrapes, burns, sore throats, and even as a general cleaner. Then in 1895, the brand started popping up in ads. And it wasn't just for health anymore. Remember those old school barber shops where they sprayed a little bit of everything? Well, Listerine was part of that mix. It was also being used to clean floors and furniture. Lawrence even claimed it could handle that nasty carpet mildew. Plus, it was great for cutting boards and kitchens. And don't forget about gangrenous wounds and sore throats. Ah yes, Listerine could handle that too. In fact, by the end of the 19th century, it was touted as a cure for halitosis, a big word back then for bad breath. But let's be clear, in those early days, people weren't swishing Listerine around in their mouths for fresh breath. Nope, that was a few decades down the line. Back then, it was mostly about disinfecting, cleaning, and even adding a splash to your bath to ward off infection. Why? Well, back then, baths were lovely, but they could also harbor all sorts of bacteria. Plus, if you had open cuts or wounds, a dip in the tub could lead to a world of hurt. So a little Listerine in the water served as a protective shield against those pesky germs. It wasn't exactly a spa day, but hey, it was better than getting an infection. As the years rolled on, people came up with all sorts of ways to use Listerine, from cleaning dentures to giving your dog a bath. And let's not forget about the gym bags, you know, the stinky, damp towels and sweaty gear. Well, Listerine tackled that problem too. Throughout the early 1900s, it continued to be a powerhouse of disinfecting action, but things were about to change in a big way. As the 1920s rolled around, sales of Listerine started to level off. People still loved it, but they weren't rushing to buy it as often as they used to. This is where the brilliant minds at the Lambert Pharmacal Company, the folks behind Listerine, had to get creative. They needed a way to remind folks why they loved Listerine in the first place. And let's face it, people had a lot on their minds back then. The roaring 20s was all about jazz, flappers, and a whole lot of fun. But there was a problem lurking beneath the surface, something people weren't even aware of. It was a problem that would eventually make you hold your breath, cringe, and reach for the nearest mouthwash. I'm talking about bad breath, but not just any bad breath. Oh no, we're talking about halitosis. Now you might be thinking, what's the big deal with a little bad breath? Well, back in the 1920s, it was a social faux pas of the highest order. It could ruin dates, end friendships, and even cost you your job. But the worst part, you might not even realize you had it. Here's the thing. Halitosis was nothing new. People had been dealing with it since, well, forever. But the way we perceived it and dealt with it was about to change dramatically. Now enter the marketing geniuses at Listerine. They took a problem that had been around forever and turned it into something big, something scary, something you couldn't afford to ignore. They launched a campaign that hit newspapers, magazines, and even the silver screen. The ads weren't just informative. No, they were dramatic, pulling at heartstrings and tugging at fears. One ad featured a man whose bad breath drives women crazy. Another showed a guy whose halitosis ruined his chance at winning a big case in court. Then there was the classic one, with the sad-eyed girl who couldn't find a husband because of her bad breath. These ads made people afraid of what they didn't know, and afraid of what they couldn't see. And in the midst of this fear, Listerine swooped in as the hero of the story, the solution to a problem that suddenly seemed bigger than life itself. With every purchase, you weren't just buying a bottle of antiseptic. You were buying peace of mind, confidence, and maybe even love. From that point on, Listerine wasn't just a product, it was a way of life. In fact, sales skyrocketed from $115,000 in 1921 to over $8 million by 1927. That's not just growth, that's a revolution. Before long, Listerine became a household name, a must-have for millions of Americans. But it wasn't just about selling a product. It was about selling a feeling of confidence, a feeling of being fresh, and a feeling of being socially secure. Today, Listerine continues to be one of the most popular mouthwashes in the world. And every time someone uses it, they're taking part in a story that began over 100 years ago. The story of a product that evolved, adapted, and conquered not just the market, but our daily routines and our collective psyche. The rise of Listerine reminds us that success isn't always about the first mover or the strongest product. It's about telling the right story at the right time. Now, who's up for a round of marketing trivia?